term neurodivergence is going to relate most to brain injury survivors due to these changes. So we might see changes in cognition, we might see changes in learning, or changes in how they communicate. So for cognition, I hope everyone has had or has not had the experience this week of where they are tired and stressed and they can't find their car keys. But if you could imagine every part of your day feeling a little bit like those stressed out moments where you can't find something, sometimes that's someone's entire experience. It also might change how they learn. Having a visual deficit, if I can't see out of my right eye, I'm only really now attending to the left side of space. So what's happening to all the information from this side? And then when you think about communication, we are a species that loves to communicate vocally. So if you have any kind of processing issues or auditory issues, you might already experience how often we rely on that vocal language to give directions or to give instruction or to help someone. So when those types of communication avenues are in some ways challenged, we're going to have a really hard time integrating back into the day-to-day life that we had. Are there any questions about general brain injury? All right, we are going to move on then. Dr. Spear is going to talk to us a little bit about the Rancho Los Amigos scale as well as the continuum of care. We did put some videos into our Rancho Los Amigos slides. I do want to give a slight trigger warning as they are patients who are trached and have some other motor deficits that you will see. The videos do get a little choppy over Zoom, but I really want you to listen to the auditory as well as see some of the visuals.
So we think about injuries. We can kind of do the video towards the end, or should we start with it maybe?
You want to start with it?
Yeah, go ahead and start with it.
Touch the ball for me. I want you to look up at the ceiling. Good, and look down at the floor.
So one of the ways that we look at recovery from brain injury is how patients begin to emerge and regain their consciousness. And the Rancho Los Amigos scale is kind of a way to categorize that. But lower down the scale, 1 is when someone is in a coma, and 2 is when people start to have a sleep-wake cycle, but they don't respond to their environment. 3 is a population of people that we refer to as being in a minimally conscious state. And I would say about a third of people who are in a minimally conscious state actually get misdiagnosed and sent to skilled nursing facilities and never actually have access to care. And so it's really important in the acute settings that we identify these patients appropriately so that they're in the right environments for care. But these patients aren't forming memories, they're not aware of what's going on in their environment, and they're basically just beginning to turn on, get some basic arousal, and follow very basic commands. These are the patients who in that video were being tested to kind of see where they're at on they've had significant diffuse axonal injury, and that's one kind of injury, and it's really important to have them in the right setting of care. After you've been in a minimally conscious state, it can take a lot of time to begin to emerge. And many patients may be in a minimally conscious state and not begin to emerge into that state for weeks and still have a very good outcome. And that's something that a lot of ICUs and hospitals, even trauma surgeons and neurologists aren't aware of. And so care is withdrawn or not provided in an adequate way for a lot of patients who would actually benefit and have good recovery. The data actually shows that a patient can have a very good outcome and still be in an amnestic state for up to 2 months. That means that patients who have been in a coma for 2 weeks don't emerge to look like that patient we were just looking at for 2 weeks and then can remain in a confused, disoriented state, sometimes for months, before they're participating more meaningfully in therapy and getting better. And to talk, before we get the videos back on, to talk a little bit about what patients can look like in terms of their trauma. This Rancho Los Amigos scale describes really diffuse injuries and the majority of the patients that recover. But what it doesn't describe is types of injuries that cause focal deficits. And as we know, our brain creates mind, and any manifestation that you see of any kind of neurodivergent behavior can occur in someone with a brain injury. We see patients who think that loved ones have been replaced by exact duplicates, people who think they're immortal, people who aren't aware of the right side of their body, people who lack awareness of their deficits and think that their lives were completely different before. So this can be incredibly disabling, not just to the patient and the person recovering, but also to an entire family. And so getting into the right setting of care becomes critical for the right treatment. And treatment strategies are focused on this recovery, but they also require a lot of knowledge and know-how around how to manage these recovering patients. We can go to the second video and I can kind of pick up there, unless you think the video is what's throwing us off. But I would go ahead and show this video. So here you have a confused and more agitated patient. Here's someone who's beginning to be more aware of their environment than they're able to follow commands, but they're very flat, they're very immediate in their responses, and you can see him yelling and becoming aggressive and irritable. And that kind of irritability and aggression is very common in a patient who isn't able to integrate all of the information around them. They're not aware of where they are. They may have a difficult time integrating sound or noise, and also lose the ability to suppress frustration or irritability and become overwhelmed by their emotions. And as you can imagine, it really does help to be in an appropriate structured environment to help with that recovery, with behaviorists and people who really understand how to support someone like this. They can be very terrifying and overwhelming to a family. And these patients that are in a stage 4 and stage 5 of that recovery scale aren't really laying down memories yet. So they're not remembering people, they don't know where they are. So you can imagine how much that contributes to their fear and anxiety in this recovery process. They have no idea whether they're trapped in that environment forever, which does feel like forever if you're not laying down memories yet. We can go to the next slide. Give it a shot.
I'll try it.
So 6, 7, and 8, you begin to have more appropriate responses. And so these patients are able to interact. A lot of times they're able to control their aggression a little bit better. And they begin to lay down memories, but they're not thinking as creatively or as capable of using their frontal lobes. So you may have a patient that's able to brush their teeth and take basic care of themselves, but they're not able to really think about what someone else is thinking and put themselves in that spot, to plan for the future, to strategize around their own care. And while they may be able to do basic care in a home setting, they're not going to be safe driving or returning to work or being out in the community, because they become very dangerous for themselves and the society around them. It would be like, taking an 8-year-old and saying it's okay to drive the family car or to get out in the community and go grocery shopping. It could very easily get lost and overwhelmed. And so in that process of recovery, which can sometimes take months, it's not only important to provide the right type of care for each patient within that stage of recovery. You're not going to be working on memory with someone who isn't laying down memories. You're not going to be working on executive tasks or higher levels of independence in someone who is irritable or frustrated or becomes aggressive very quickly or lacks insight. And so when you are in the red zone, an emergency department, an intensive care unit after a brain injury, that's just basically medical stability. As soon as a patient is medically stable and safe, then we try to get them into a rehabilitative environment as quickly as possible. And those are the green boxes. So IRF stands for inpatient rehab facility. And that's typically where patients can go once their medical stability is such that they can participate in therapy and they can begin to participate more actively in their rehabilitative care. In patients who are still on ventilators or require significant amounts of medications or have a lot of dangerous, life-threatening medical issues, wounds, heart issues, organ failure, those patients will typically go to an LTAC, which is a long-term acute care facility, and stay in that type of environment until they're safe to move to a more appropriate rehabilitative environment. IRFs and LTACs are much more expensive environments on the order of $1,000 or more a day. And those are the settings where you're seeing a physician every day and you're getting a lot more acute treatment. And as I mentioned before, about a third or more of patients, and that's without, and that's in settings where there is appropriate care in big medical centers and patients that are appropriately funded. Best case scenario is to get half or 2/3 of the right patient into the right environment, and it becomes worse in other environments. SNFs are often where some of these patients are discharged to, and when that happens, they rarely have the opportunity to access the appropriate best practices for care. And then transitional residential treatment are settings where after acute rehab, patients can go to a place where they continue to live. And it's like going from high school to college, where they can work on those tasks for community independence and to become more independent in a home environment without as much support from family. And then once you're able to get out of a residential setting, then there are a lot of resources in home and community and in day treatment to help people become more independent in the community.
Any questions from anyone on either the continuum of care or the Rancho scales? All right, we'll move along.
Yeah,
So we're going to go over some barriers to reintegration.
So just to talk a little bit more about what a few different patients may look like, and to illustrate what we were talking about before, we can look at different patients and how they go through the system. Because every injury is so different, the emerging patient after recovery can be very different and have very different needs to be supported back into society and back into their community. And so to take one example, patient one, take a 28-year-old male who is maybe a frontline worker, say in a grocery store, a cashier, a line worker, electrician, and have, imagine this patient to have injury to their primary language centers. So someone who may have had a lifelong job where language was very important and is suddenly stripped of that, there's a lot of work that needs to go back into getting the ability to talk again and find words and operate in that environment. And sometimes they need to retrain for a different job. Sometimes there needs to be a lot of education in that system of care. People will see patients that have language problems and assume that their deficits or problems with their ability to do their job is much worse than it is. Even if they're perfectly capable of doing their job as well as before, there can be a lot of miscommunication or misunderstanding of what they're able to do. And so communicating with employers and setting up strategies and helping to integrate them back into that community becomes really important for that kind of integration and interdependence with them back into their community. Patient two, imagine a woman, 50 years old, who used to be an air traffic controller. Imagine relatively minor injury to their frontal lobes. This is a person who may feel like they could go back to work without any difficulties, but is having higher level problems with impulsivity or decreased attention to detail, angry outbursts or interrupting others, symptoms of attention deficit or irritability or motor restlessness. These patients may be able to go back to most jobs and they may be able to kind of structure their environment so they can do those things. But what we look at in helping someone like this get back to work is not just the risk to themselves or their own reputation, or the risk to their family and support structure, but also societal risk. We have very high bars for people like air traffic controllers or, surgeons or bus drivers to get back to work because of the amount of people that could be injured if they don't do their job very well. And if they have deficits that could contribute to errors that could be deadly. And so we have a much higher barrier for some patients returning to work than others. And a lot of systems have very straightforward strategies for that. For example, air traffic controllers or airline pilots have to get through the FAA in order to successfully return to work, so that the onus is not on them or on the providers and doctors that are caring for them, but there's a system in place. And that system doesn't exist for a lot of jobs that can be equally dangerous. And so it's really important to help them gain insight, or to help family and employers gain insight in order for them to safely get back to work. And then imagine a patient 3 who's a little bit older, used to be a school teacher. I was taking care of a patient who had some motor problems that affected their ability to move, but it didn't impair their ability to be a school teacher. This person may be able to get back to work with the right structure in place. A loss of balance or some neglect may be something that you could rehab. But if you were to take this patient and have problems with arousal or fatigue or integrating a lot of information, I've taken care of school teachers who are towards the end of their career, and they lose their disability because their employers or their insurance companies say, well, you should be able to work just fine. You were able to go back to work for 3 months or a year, and we don't see why you couldn't go back to your job, when they are disintegrating at home because they're exhausted at the end of the day. They're having trouble sleeping. They're having trouble putting the rest of their life together. And their life begins to disintegrate because they have to work so hard just to function in those environments. And there's very little advocacy and support for these patients in the community. We spend a lot of time, and sometimes to no avail, trying to support these patients so that they don't get lost and drowned in the system. I think that kind of covers, you could do a 6-hour lecture on just different manifestations of these 3 patients, but I think that paints kind of a broad picture of the different things that can happen after brain injury. And I think one of the most important things that this illustrates, or that I try to illustrate with this, is that when you are working on getting back to work, an injury like this can create any deficit that you would see in a population, from autism to ADHD to spinal cord problems, that would automatically engender support in the community that doesn't after these injuries because of the ignorance around them. And we'll talk a little bit about that question in the next section, but to just allude to it, our strategies for returning back to work put a specialist in helping people return to work in between the employer and the person that we're caring for, and making sure that both get what they need, not returning to work too quickly, starting out slow and building up, making sure that they're able to do the job. Maybe they're able to go back to work right away, but they can only do a few days a week and they need more time to recover. There are a lot of different strategies that we take in supporting those patients, but it really depends on their premorbid function, how much reserve they have, how difficult and dangerous their job used to be, and also how supportive their employer is in that process. There's a lot of jobs where people will say, we don't have part-time, they return full-time or not at all. We get this a lot with, firefighters and police officers, where, there's not going to be a long-term desk job option. It's all or nothing. And that becomes very difficult, and it becomes emotionally destabilizing for the person served and their families. All right, Karen, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Spear. Those were awesome examples. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the part-time return to work question as well. Like, it just depends on what the job is and what the plan has been put in place. We're lucky here at Craig that we have a community reintegration program that helps buffer the I'm coming out of rehab and I'm getting back into the real world of my job. So we're lucky for that. But as people with brain injuries begin returning to the workforce in either their previous jobs or in new jobs, there are quite a few strategies that we can share with them to be as successful as they can be. If we want to go to the next slide, that can include identifying organization systems that work for them, as in smartphones, calendars, planners, writing questions ahead of time before meetings or before starting their day. And as we just learned, communication can also be a struggle for folks after sustaining a brain injury, whether they struggle with the thinking and processing part of communication or physically being able to just get the words out. A few strategies that are encouraged for people are to use self-advocacy statements, such as, I need help with prioritizing my to-do list, or I struggle with sitting in the middle of crowds. And if you could assist me with how to set up my email. So we're really encouraging people to self-advocate and really talk about what their needs are. That's one of the most important things that we can stress. And I think Dr. Spear hit the nail on the head. I heard him say communication several times, and that's really a key success point. While engaging in conversations, we suggest that people verify what they are hearing. So it sounds like you said that you prefer I email you a time to set up a meeting, or I hear you saying that I should arrive a few minutes early. Is this what you mean? So then there's an opportunity for everyone to hear what the conversation points are, process the information, and then restate it and be on the same page with listening and speaking to each other. While engaging in conversations, these can really help to break down the communication barriers. And then follow up, whether by email, setting reminders, reviewing your checklist, end of shift meetings with supervisors, etc., whatever you guys set up as your workflow. Now, if you're lucky, employees have had access to resources to help them set up these strategies. But if not, now you have some of these as tools in your toolkit that you can help to pass on to others. And I think we want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So as employers for people who are surviving brain injury, you can assess the person's fit to the job. So like Dr. Spear was saying earlier, firefighters may not be going back to the full-time firefighting position. There might be a different type of job that they can come back to. If someone struggles with multitasking and gets frustrated with communication, they're probably not a great fit as a front desk assistant who has to be performing job duties while greeting people, answering phones, problem solving different complaints and issues that may arise. I think that's our patient number 2 we were looking at earlier. And then we want to pay attention to your employees' physical demeanor. So do they look stressed? Do they have red eyes? Are their hands on their head? Are they rubbing their neck? Are they isolating themselves? Are they getting a little cranky as you're starting to talk to them? This might be a good time to check in with them. Do they need a quick break? Do they need a walk? Do they need a little water? Maybe just encouraging, reassuring chat. And then helping to meet environmental needs. Is this person someone who would not benefit from being in the center of all the cubicles or right by the water cooler because they get too distracted and visually or auditorily overwhelmed? Would they work best with noise canceling headphones? Is a big paper calendar on their desk helpful, or is that too distracting? Everyone and every job is different. So the key is truly open and safe communication so that they feel that they can talk to their employers without feeling like they're going to get perceived as a disgruntled employee or they're not appreciative for the things that are coming across. So I think that's important to think about. Which can help lead to assisting in the workflow for your employees. So setting up structure, schedule, expectations, job duties. And with job duties, not only like what are the job expectations, but what are the behavioral expectations? Like how do they need to present themselves, dress, timeliness, those sorts of things. Everyone and every job is different again. So it's really important as they're setting up these workflows to include rest breaks. Rest breaks are definitely a positive if you can build them into the schedule. But discuss what flexibility of a rest break might look like. You know, so yeah, you get 15 minutes of a break a day because that's what the law says you should do, but maybe there needs to be a little bit more flexibility built in that. If someone is sitting in front of a computer screen for 6 to 8 hours a day, or even just a half a day, as an occupational therapist and someone who delves into vision a lot, it's really important that you take screen breaks, and even if it's just for 1 minute. So we've all now been on the screen for 36 minutes, according to my clock. So if you have glasses on, take your glasses off, take your hands, and just put them right into your little eyeball sockets right there. What you're going to experience is just darkness, a little bit of deep pressure, proprioception, and your eyes get to go to the spa for about 30 seconds. And it's amazing how much that just helps to rebuild energy and get somebody set back on track of what's moving forward with their day. So that's quick and easy and something that everybody can do without adding too much impact into their routine and their productivity. Okay. Questions about that? Okay.
We do have a question out there. I don't know any on that, and if you want me to wait, but there was a question, you know, how does part-time work integrate into the recovery process? Now, I know that was Dr. Spears, but so I don't know if you want to jump into that or wait till the end.
Can we wait to the end on that? Because I think
yeah, absolutely.
Chat with that
Yeah.
and other things. Yeah, perfect. So if you go back one slide, Ari, I think it's important to just in your mind at the top of this list in big bold letters is the word communication. Okay, so communication using the strategies that we previously talked about. Ask your employee what helps you be successful. So engage them in the process, because that's going to get the buy-in, that's going to get the feeling of ownership, and you're going to have more success in day-to-day operations and workflow. And understanding that change is hard for these employees. So if this is a new job for them, change is hard. If it's a different job or their workflow changes, you know, mid-year, it's really hard. They're going to be working so hard and need a little bit of settle in time, you know, to get there. And the more support that they can have from their employers, the better. Okay, so in summary, you can go to the next slide, Ari. It's helpful as an employer of a brain injury survivor to watch for symptoms of stress, help with environmental modifications as needed, help set the stage for a positive work experience with thoughtful workflows. And if your employee hasn't had any resources offered to them, direct them to the brain injury survivor resources available for them right here in Colorado. Next slide. Next slide. Yep. So right here in Colorado, we have the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado, BIAC. We just kind of scratched the surface on resources on the next couple pages, but they're all available when you go to the BIAC site. Craig offers free webinars. It's called Craig Rehab U. You can find that on the Craig website. The next slide will give us a little bit more information about the nurse advice line that we have here at Craig that patients can utilize. There's also the job accommodation network, which is a huge resource that our community reintegration department uses. And they offer it out to employees and employers in particular.